Good morning, everybody. First of all, I would like to thank Dr. Harshad sir for giving us this opportunity of speaking in this Connect with Experts. And on behalf of POJS, I would like to welcome you all to this third webinar in the series. We would start with basics of semen analysis and semen preparation. Mainly, we'll cover it for IUI. So 1 minute, my screen, yeah. As we all know that subfertility occurs in more than 1 in 10 couples, and the reduced semen quality is implicated in approximately 50% of these cases. So how to check for male subfertility? We basically have to remember one thing, that whenever you check for male subfertility, semen analysis is only a part of your workup when you label any male as subfertile. So you have to always start with the detailed history of the patient, the age of the patient. Even age of a male for that matter is very important, as we know that the semen count motility decreases with increasing age. You have to take a detailed history of all the habits: alcohol intake, tobacco smoking, coital history, drug use and abuse, past medical and surgical history, because many a times patients don't give a proper history of orchidectomy done in the past. And then finally it comes to semen analysis. Sorry, which is a part of this workup. And then comes the hormonal evaluation and genetic test, which are to be specifically done once the semen analysis is done. These tests are not to be routinely advised for each and every patient. Doing these tests would depend on your semen analysis report. Now, the second part is the workup of both the partners of male and female is always to be done simultaneously. We should not first wait for the male partner to be treated or diagnosed and then move to the female partner, or vice versa, because treating both of them simultaneously would give you better results. We'll just go back to the basics a little. This is the male reproductive tract, in which testis produces spermatozoa. We have got a bilateral pair of testes. Then comes epididymis, where the sperms mature and the storage happens there. And it is here that they achieve carnitin, and hence the motility. The vas deferens, which is also a storage site, is also the transport for these sperms. Then the seminal vesicles, which basically secrete fructose and which composes 50% of the semen volume. And hence checking for fructose and having an intact seminal vesicle is very important. Then prostate contributes to about 40% of the semen volume. It contains citric acid, acid phosphatase, various proteolytic enzymes, and zinc. And 1 to 2% comes from bulbourethral glands. So semen analysis is basically recommended for investigation of the semen quality. The cutoff values are defined by the WHO manual, which came in 2010. Initially, it was way back in 1999, which we used to follow, but after this 2010 manual, there's been huge changes in it. There are different forms of male infertility which have been described based on these values. We basically have to differentiate them as oligospermia, where the count is low, asthenospermia, which depends on their motility, teratozoospermia, and the combination of this, which is called as OATS. So semen analysis, the most important part of semen analysis is always collection. The collection should be very proper. The doctor or the lab technician or the embryologist, whoever does this, should always talk to the patient, counsel the male patient regarding how you are going to do it, when you are going to do it, because even the male partner has to be prepared to produce semen sample on that very day, and that too in the said premises. As we all know that the initial sample is always sperm rich, so that is why the collection has to be very meticulous in a valve-mouthed container, which is to be labeled. Because at times it happens that as the semen comes in spurts, the initial sample may just spill off, and whatever is collected is just the prostatic secretions, which may contain only mucus and not sperm. And this kind of a male may wrongly be labeled as azoospermic. There should be a proper hand wash before collection. The ideal abstinence should be of 3 to 5 days. A lesser abstinent would give you false result, wherein the semen volume may be low, and you may think of the patient having as azoospermia or low semen volume. And anything more than 5 days would also give you varied results. It should preferably not be a condom collection, as we all know that condom is spermicidal. The collection should be in the lab only, or wherever you're going to check for the semen, it should be in the same premises. And when the semen is home collected or collected at any other premises, you specifically have to mention it on your paper that the semen was brought from outside. I preferably always take a separate consent wherein it is very clearly written that such and such sample is brought by so and so person from outside. Now, what if there is no semen in the lab? If the patient is not able to collect semen on that day? So you have to rule out two important things. One is retrograde ejaculation. That is when the sperm, instead of coming out in the ejaculate, would go in the urine or in the urinary bladder. And second important is erectile dysfunction. So how do you differentiate these two? In retrograde ejaculation, the patient has no erectile dysfunction. The erection is absolutely normal. You have to differentiate from aspermia, which is nothing but absent semen. There, in retrograde ejaculation, very little or no semen is produced. And when you centrifuge the urine sample, you would find the presence of sperm. So always, whenever a patient gives a history of retrograde ejaculation, you should always see for the urine sample. And you cannot just scan the entire urine, but you have to centrifuge the urine sample and then see for the sediment where you will find sperms. Erectile dysfunction, it can either be temporary, which is generally the case in 10 to 20% of the male patients, which is related to stress, anxiety, or you could call it performance pressure. A simple counseling, calming down the patient helps in these cases. Or even if that doesn't help and the patient is still not able to give a sample, you could try treating him medically with just 1 or 2 doses of sildenafil. And at times, if the patient has long-standing cases, the patient himself gives a history of erectile dysfunction. So in such cases, in long-standing chronic cases, you could try a vibrator or maybe testicular sperm extractions. So this is basically a summary of the WHO 2010 criteria. I'll go one by one into the details of all these parameters. WHO mentions a semen volume of 1.5 to 3 ml as normal. But in the Indian scenario, even a semen volume of 1 ml is to be taken as normal, because many a times it happens that a semen volume in the range of 1 to 1.5 ml is also taken as normal. The total sperm number, that is sperm per ejaculate, which is taken as normal, is 39 million. Sperm concentration, that is sperm per ml, should be 15, which was initially taken as 20 million, has now come down to 15 million. Now coming to the total motility, a normal motility of 40% is normal, of which progressive motility should be more than 32%. The vitality, that is the living sperms, should be 58%, and the sperm morphology should be 4%. That is only 4% normal sperms are even all right or okay to give a pregnancy. Now mind well, these are all lower reference limit or the lower values. These are not absolute values. So anything less than that would not give you a pregnancy is the basic fallacy of this WHO 2010 criteria. So we have to know that this is just the lower limit of all the counts and criteria. So now coming, so this is how once the semen is in your lab, so this is how one by one, step by step, you start assessing it. First, you look for liquefaction. Then you see for the appearance or the color of the semen. You measure the semen volume till then. Then you look for the pH only if it is required. Then you prepare a wet preparation to see for the microscopy, especially the motility. Then in case you find any problems with motility, you would check for vitality. At times, you have to make spears for sperm morphology. Then you assess the sperm concentration. And in few required and indicated cases, you may even do the immunoglobulin test. Then the peroxidase positive cells for pus cells. And then you centrifuge the sample either to be used for IUI, for cryopreservation. Now, once the semen is in the lab, this is the volume that you look at. So any less volume could be because of improper collection, spillage, or a short abstinence. But the most important cause of a low volume with absent fructose and azoospermia is to be remembered as congenital bilateral absence of vas deferens or vas aplasia, and in few cases, ejaculatory duct obstruction. So this important cause of azoospermia with low volume is often missed out in about 80 to 90% of the cases. because they never give a history of low volume, and in such low volumes, doing a fructose becomes problematic. Now coming to the color, it should always be homogeneous and gray opalescent in appearance. It should never be white or cloudy. If it appears less opaque, if the sperm concentration is very low. The color may also be different if it contains RBCs or blood, it is hemospermia, which can be due to some local injury at times or a lot of chronic long-standing infection. Yellow in a man with jaundice or if there's history of any drug intake. The pH is generally taken in the reference of 7.2 to 7.4. We routinely do not check for pH of the sperm or the semen. Now, liquefaction. This is the most important part of semen analysis because until and unless a semen liquefies or it actually becomes liquid, you do not test for the count and motility as it may give you false results. So immediately after ejaculation, when you see the semen sample, it is typically a semi-solid and a coagulated mass. And within a few minutes at room temperature, it starts to liquefy. That is because of the proteolytic enzymatic action of the prostate glands. Ideally, it should liquefy within 30 minutes. You may wait for 60 minutes for it to liquefy, but beyond 60 minutes, if it doesn't liquefy, then that goes to say that there is some problem with the prostatic secretions. So what are the various causes of delayed liquefaction? The delayed liquefaction can be because of any infection surgery of the prostate. And this can be found out if you just examine the patient and you would see a tender prostate. A simple treatment for this is giving antibiotics. But if on that day the semen sample is already in your lab and you want to do a therapeutic testing, or if you have to prepare that sample for IUI, what you can do is mix equal amount of semen with media and try mixing it for about 2 to 3 minutes. The semen sample liquefies. Second, continuous repeated gentle passage through the pipette. Just do in and out movement. That would be enough for the sample to be liquefied. The third thing is you could just add bromelain to that, 1 or 2 drops of semen sample, and it immediately liquefies. This can be used for doing semen testing if you have to do it in a non-liquefied sample. And if the patient has persistent history of delayed liquefaction, which can be idiopathic at times, what you can do is when you give a semen container to the patient to collect the sample, you could just put in some media inside and ask him to collect the sample in a container which already has media, so that as soon as the semen falls in the media, it starts liquefying after he shakes the sample. So he doesn't have to worry regarding the liquefaction. Now, another important factor of semen analysis is viscosity. Viscosity is nothing but allowing the semen to drop by gravity, and you could see that when it drops, it forms a long thread. So that thread should be around 2 centimeters in length. Anything more than that goes to show that the viscosity is abnormal. Viscosity is another important function which is given by prostatic gland secretions and 10 to 15% by seminal vesicles. So any infection, surgery of the prostate or the seminal vesicles reflects in delayed liquefaction and viscosity of the sample. Now, after this physical appearance and physical testing is done, we go for microscopy. We check for aggregation and agglutination. So these are two different terms. Aggregates are nothing but you would just see small semen sperm clumps in and around here and there. So whenever there is aggregation, you do not have to worry because they are just immotile sperms. You would see that the aggregates are not moving. So this is the most important thing to distinguish an aggregate from an agglutination. In agglutination, what happens is all your motile sperms start sticking to each other. Either they stick head to head or tail to tail or head to tail. If it is just an isolated finding, you need not worry about it. But if you see it in gross sample, that is more than 50 to 60% of the semen sample, wherein if you have identified high power fields there, and in almost all of the fields, you would see 1 or 2 agglutinates. So this is suggestive of anti-sperm antibodies. Initially, they used to do PCTs, but nowadays with the advent of immunological tests, they are not done. But still in few low resource setting, a PCT is always less financially burdening to the patient rather than these tests, the immunoglobulin test, which cost anything around 20 to 25,000. So whenever this agglutination is gross, it basically assesses a problem in counting the motility because all the motile sperms have formed an agglutinate. and that is why the count may be wrongly assessed. Now coming to the motility, which is another important aspect of semen analysis, it is graded as progressive motility, non-progressive motility, and immotile sperms or immotility. So basically what happens in progressive motility is the sperm has got a forward progressive motility. It's nothing but a straight forward fast moving sperm is called as forward progressive motility, which should be more than 32%. And a non-progressive motility is when a sperm has motility, but instead of moving forward, it just starts making rounds around itself. It moves in circular manner, or it has got a very, very low motility wherein it cannot move beyond 1 or 2 fields. So when you do a total of progressive and non-progressive motility, so the combined motility should always be 40%. Many a times in the report, this motility is taken as grade A, B, C, D. Ideally, progressive motility should always start from grade A, but in multiple labs, it is the other way around also, where they take A as a non-motile sperm and D as progressive motility. But there are only 3 types of motility that you should always see in a semen sample. One is your progressive motility, second is non-progressive motility, and third is immotile sperms. Now the thing about immotile sperms is we have to distinguish whether these immotile sperms are dead sperms or they are live sperms, because immotility necessarily doesn't mean that they are dead. They are still sperms which may be live, but they have only a problem with their motility. Immotile sperms look like dead sperms because they're not moving. So that is why this concept of total motile sperm count came into being from 2015. So instead of just classifying the patient as oligospermia, asthenospermia, teratozoospermia, what we have started doing now, this is especially more useful for IVF, lesser useful for IUI. Number of moving sperm in the ejaculated are calculated by total motile sperm count, because you can prognosticate your results. You can basically divide the patients as to what treatment they have to be offered, whether they go directly for ICSI, whether you would do an IUI or an IVF. So total motile sperm count is nothing but multiply the volume of the semen sample into the sperm concentration per ml into the motility. Motility is nothing but your total of progressive and non-progressive motility, which has to be more than, progressive motility has to be more than 32%. So this TMSC, or the total motile sperm count, should be more than 20 million per ejaculate. So you can take that this sample is normal and the patient could even get pregnant on their own. If this TMSC is less than 5 million, so these patients are very good candidates for ICSI. That is, in ART instead of IVF, you can take them for ICSI and they'll give you good results. If this count is between 5 to 10 million, you could do an IVF for the patient. And if the count is anywhere between 10 to 20 million per ml, an IUI would suffice. And anything more than 20 is normal. So the total motile sperm count is nothing but multiplying volume into sperm concentration per ml into percent motility. This is a very good article which came in 2015, and where they showed that this TMSC is a better indicator for the severity of male factor infertility than the WHO system of OATS, that is oligoasthenoteratozoospermia. Because it is not wise to define men with semen parameters below reference as infertile, meaning that in the WHO criteria, wherein they have given anything less than the lower reference, cannot be taken as infertility, because pregnancy is not even guaranteed in couples where semen parameters are within or above the reference range. So as we all know that male age is inversely correlated with TMSC, the finding is consistent with several previous reports which affirm that male aging affects the fertility. Generally, the number of sperm cells as well as sperm motility decreases with age, because it is accompanied by deterioration of testicular histological architecture as well. Now, here we need to differentiate immotile from dead sperms. So here comes the role for checking the vitality or the viability, where 58% is the normal value or the lower reference limit. Anything more than that is absolutely normal. This is done by a simple eosine staining. The principle behind this is the damaged plasma membrane of the dead sperm, which is a non-vital sperm, it allows entry of this impermeant stains. So the stain simply goes inside a dead sperm. So it is taken as dead sperms are always stained red. They look dark pink in your slide, but the dictum to be followed is dead sperm are always stained red. So we always have to ask the pathologist or whoever does the semen analysis to give a detailed report of this immotile sperm, because many a time in the motility, they just write as immotile sperms 50%, 60%. But we also have to ask him once, please check whether they are dead sperm or live sperm. Because if they are live sperm, the patient can still go for ART. But in case they are dead sperms, the treatment completely differs. Now coming to the number, there are two parameters which you check in the number. One is sperm concentration, that is sperm per ml. That is the number of spermatozoa per unit volume of semen, and it is nothing but a function of the number of spermatozoa emitted and the volume of fluid diluting them. The normal lower reference limit is 15 million per ml. Now the total sperm number is nothing but the total number of spermatozoa in the entire ejaculate. That is 39 million per ejaculate. Sperm concentration is nothing but the amount per ejaculate. Sorry, this is the total sperm number, and sperm concentration would always be per ml. So whenever you read any report, always see whether they have written it as sperm concentration or total sperm number. At times it happens that they write total sperm number as per ml and the values are given as low as 15 million. And you would think that it is lower than the reference limit, and suddenly the treatment of the patient changes. So sperm concentration is always per ml and total sperm number is of the total ejaculate or per ejaculate. Now round cells. This is another entity which we commonly find in all our reports. Round cells plus, pus cells many, or pus cells numerous, or pus cells more than 100, or pus cells incountable. So the thing is, round cells, macrophages and pus cells all look same under the slide. If you do a wet mount preparation and you look at the slide, everything appears round and all these three things appear to be the same. So you always have to cross check with whoever your pathologist or the reporting person is, have you done a peroxidase test for the pus cells? Because having pus cells suddenly changes your management to pyospermia and the patient is unnecessarily put for a semen culture analysis or a long course of antibiotics. Because generally what happens in pathology labs is under one single slide smear, all this is checked. So you basically have to do a dry smear peroxidase staining to see whether they are pus cells, because pus cells appear brown in peroxidase staining. But when you see all these in a wet preparation, all of them appear round. Even immature spermatids appear round and the patient is wrongly labeled as having pyospermia. And what happens is, even after giving a lot of antibiotics, the patient again goes and checks in the same lab and again the same reports come. And macrophages, remember, is a normal finding in a semen sample. So you don't have to worry for the macrophages. Now coming to antibody testing, the anti-sperm antibodies in the semen are always IgG and IgA. They interfere with the acrosomal reaction and zona binding. There are two direct tests which are little costly and they have to be done only if you find any indication to test for anti-sperm antibodies. So when do you do that? When you find that the entire female factor for fertility are all right, everything for the male factor is also all right, but somehow the patient is not conceiving. So this could be a minor cause. This used to be done initially by the postcoital test, which now no longer is done in our settings, but still in places where these costly testing is not available, PCT is a good test to rule out anti-sperm antibodies. The mixed antiglobulin reaction is done in a native sample, but a more better test is the immunobead test, which costs anywhere between 20 to 25,000. It is done in a prepared sample. The simple principle is that the beads adhere to the motile and immotile spermatozoa that have surface bound antibodies, but the percentage of motile sperm with bound beads is recorded. So to do this immunobead test, the motility also has to be good, because the beads which stick to the motile spermatozoa are only counted. So when the motility is good, it would give you a good test result. Now a word or a line about sperm DNA fragmentation. DNA fragmentation could be single or double stranded breaks in the nuclear DNA, which result in potential loss or alteration of genetic information. The sperm DNA breaks could be a result of defective spermatogenesis due to unrepaired DNA, which are generated during the process of chromatin remodeling. And the sperm DNA is organized in a manner that it keeps the unclear chromatin compact and stable. So the main purpose of spermatozoa is delivery of the intact DNA, which contributes to the genetic information in the subsequent offspring. So there has been a lot of DNA fragmentation index tests going on. So we have to understand that this is a test which basically detects your single and double stranded breaks. So the difference between a single stranded break is that they can be corrected because they are just because of post-testicular exposure of the sample either to toxins, drugs, or environmental effects, and they can be corrected by your antioxidants. Now, which antioxidants to use, which would give you better results, there's still no clear-cut evidence, but that works only if they have single-stranded breaks. Now, double-stranded breaks are generally due to genetic defects in the patient, and these are not corrected with antioxidants. So there are n number of tests which are available which do this, but we have to understand that this DNA fragmentation index is not to be routinely done as your semen analysis report, because there is going to be some amount of DNA fragmentation always present because it's a wear and tear procedure. So even in a normal patient or even who has conceived, you would find some amount of DNA fragmentation index. So now in whom to do these tests? It basically is done in cases of recurrent implantation failure, in cases of IVF, recurrent IUI failures, if the patient has recurrent abortions, if the patient has failed IVF, in the sense you have done her IVF and the embryos have not developed or cleaved. So that is the time when you can think of doing a DFI for that patient. And you would find that if there is a very high DFI, so you could shift from IVF to ICSI. Or if you see that on repeated IVF attempts, you have embryo cleavage arrest. That is, the embryo has formed, but it is not dividing beyond the cleavage stage, that it doesn't divide into 6-cell, 8-cell, or a blastocyst stage. So that is the time that you can think of doing a DFI. It is a costly test, plus the other drawback is there is a lot of inter-test variation. There are about 5 to 6 types of DFI test available. So each lab does it by a different method. So we have to also understand that the values for DFI are also different for all these tests. So if you order a DFI, you also have to see what kind of a test is done, because their reference values are different and they are always given at the end of the test. A routine that is followed for all DFI is anything above 25 to 30%, the patient directly goes for ART. Anything less than 15% is taken as normal. And there are also a lot of inter-report variations. If suppose you have done a DFI for a patient today, and on the same patient you do a DFI after 1 month, you would find 2 different reports. The inter-test variations are also there, and inter-observer variations are also there, because now there are pre-stained slides where you can do DFI in your own lab. So if I do it, I will find some different DFI. If some other person does it on the same slide for the same patient, the result could differ. So we have to be very cautious when we order for a DFI, because we should be able to read the result. We should know which test or which method we are doing it, and what are you going to achieve by doing the DFI. Does the patient really need DFI? It is only to be done in very, very specific indications. Now, after all this is done, we come to semen preparation. As we all know that this is very important for all your IUI procedures. So it is always to be done in a laminar flow. The basic principles of labeling, collection, proper handling of the semen sample is to be done. You have to take specific consents before you go ahead with all this, and you have to treat it with universal precautions. A semen sample is biohazardous material. So there are 2 important techniques by which we generally prepare semen. One is the swim up technique and the other is density gradient. So density gradient is basically done when the count and motility are less, or when you have a sample which has a high amount of pus cells or debris, and wherein you think that doing a density gradient would give you better count and motility than a routine swim up technique. So in a routine swim up technique, you basically dilute semen and media in the proportion of 1:1. You can use any semen flushing media. You centrifuge this sample for 10 to 12 minutes at 1200 RPM in your Remy centrifuge. After this, you would get a supernatant and a sediment. You remove the supernatant and discard it. And whatever the pellet that you get, which is deposited at the end of your test tube or at the bottom of your test tube, is the pellet. You again resuspend this supernatant with an equal amount of media which you had initially taken, which could be 1 ml for 1 ml of semen or 1.5 for 1.5 ml of semen. You recentrifuge it. You again would get a supernatant. You discard that supernatant. And above the pellet, you layer it with about 0.8 to 0.9 ml of media. Do not layer it with a huge amount of media thinking that I may need a lot of media for the IUI to flush the tubes. It wouldn't happen so. If you put an excess amount of semen sample inside the uterus, it's definitely going to come out because the capacity does not exceed anything more than 0.8 to 0.9. So this is for the swim up. And when you layer it with the media, you would actually see that there's a cloudy appearance over the media which you start getting, which is nothing but the sperm which has swimmed up and come. And this way, the count, whenever it is cloudy in appearance, it just goes to show that the count and motility are very good and it is a very good prepared sample. Now in this semen preparation, after you do an IUI, the patient should never experience any cramps or pain, because in a badly prepared semen preparation, the patient would get pain and cramps if it contains debris or macrophages. So if the sample is not prepared well, the patient may experience pain and cramp. Now coming to the density gradient. Density gradient is nothing but centrifugation of seminal plasma over density gradients, which consist of colloidal silica coated with silane, which separates the cell by their density. A normal motile spermatozoa with an intact DNA has got a higher density and hence it goes down of the tube when you layer these density gradients in a test tube. The motile spermatozoa swims actively through the gradient material and it forms a soft pellet at the bottom of the tube. A density gradient is reverse of a swim up technique. Here the sperm swims down crossing the density gradients. We generally use a two-step discontinuous density gradient preparation. You get these density gradient media readily available in the market, either in the density of 40 and 80% or 45 and 90%. Here you layer the semen sample, the 80% density gradient forms the lowermost layer. Then you top it with 40% density gradient, and then above it, you top your semen sample. And then you centrifuge the sample in the same way as you do for a swim up technique. In density gradient, what happens is a very good motile sperm goes to the bottom of your tube and it forms a pillet. So this same pillet, after centrifugation, you just have to mix it with your media to the tune of 0.9 to 1 ml. Leave it in the warming test tube for about say 15-20 minutes and it is ready to use. This is a good technique for samples which have low count, low motility, and wherein there is a lot of pus cells and debris. So sperm preparation using density gradient usually is there. It results in a highly motile spermatozoa, free from debris, non-germ cells, and degenerating germ cells. At times there may be immature sperm cells. So for them, density gradient is a good media. Now coming to sperm preparation in HIV, as we all know that there are many cases where the couple is discordant, where the husband may be positive and the wife is negative, and they want to go ahead and have a child by IUI. So we have to understand that no matter how you prepare the semen, wherein the density gradient is still cannot claim that that sample will be HIV free. Density gradient is followed by swim up. It has been proposed as a way of preventing this infection in uninfected female partners. The procedures were developed to separate the virus-infected non-sperm cells and seminal plasma from HIV-free motile spermatozoa in the swim-up technique. Prepared samples are tested by RT-PCR and only HIV-free samples are used for ART treatments. In IUI, you can try doing this, but this does not give a 100% guarantee of the sample being HIV-free. While results so far are encouraging, there's yet insufficient evidence of the elimination of the risk of HIV infection through sperm preparation in this way. Thank you so much. Thank you for the patient hearing.
Thank you, Ajni. A very nice lecture. Few questions are there. The first one is, do you label a semen sample is abnormal on a single testing, or we want to repeat it?
Generally, when a patient comes, patient usually has a huge file of all the semen reports. So even if you see 2 or 3 reports of the patient in a year, that is enough. only for azoospermia cases, it is always better to get a second sample done before you label the patient as azoospermic.
Okay. Usually 2 samples are required to label as abnormal
For
sample.
azoospermia, they should usually be at least 1.5 months apart.
Many questions comes regarding DFI, but you have already told in detail about DFI. One more question from Dr. Harshad sir. What is the role of varicocectomy, that is a treatment for varicocele in cases moderate asthenoteratozoospermia?
Okay. Thank you, sir, for the question. So now the recent guidelines have come where they say that a varicocele is only to be operated if it is palpable. That is why the importance of doing a detailed physical examination, because 30 to 40% of the time, if you send the patient directly for a scrotal USG, you would definitely find a varicocele, but that is a subclinical.
Ashwini.
Hello.
Ashwini.
Yes,
We
Milind.
are audible now. Can you repeat now?
Your video was lost.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I said only a palpable varicocele is to be treated in the modern times now. You do not have to touch a varicocele, which is a subclinical one or which is an accidental finding on your scrotal USG. Many a times you find many epididymal cysts also on the USG. So there is no need to touch or treat such cyst.
Great.
So one more question from Ashish. What is the role of TMC cutoff for IUI in Indian scenarios?
TMC cutoff. Generally, a cutoff of anything between 10 to 20 million is good to be treated by IUI in the Indian scenario, because we still follow the principle of doing 3 to 4 cycles of IUI. We do not directly take up the patient for IVF.
One more question from hello. One
Hello?
more question. What is the concept of consequent pooling of semen sample?
Okay. Generally, it happens that when the abstinence period is very low, the semen sample that is collected is of low grade motility and count. So in such cases, we ask the patient for consecutive collection on the same day with a gap of 1 or 2 hours. It gives better semen sample. The pooled sample is good.
Okay. Is there any role of PCT nowadays?
I do not do PCT. I somehow never like that test. I still don't do it. Many andrologists advise the test these days because the immunological tests are costly. In low resource setting, to find out if there's any immunological cost, that is the only test which is available.
Okay.
Actually, there is one more question.
Yes, sir.
When to repeat the test in case if it is abnormal after giving medical treatment?
Any medical treatment should at least be given for 3 months, because that is what the sperm cycle is.
Exactly.
So any test should be repeated after a gap of 3 months. And any treatment that you want to give, whether it is antioxidants, give it at least for 3 months if you're giving it.
You should not repeat it before 3 months.
Before 3 months, yeah.
And if
Ashwini, I am asking one question.
That is, if you have a 0% motility, then
Okay.
what will you do?
0% motility. Hello?
Ah.
Am I audible? Yeah.
Yeah, when there is 0% motility, what should be done?
Okay.
What preparation you will do?
Okay, you just have to check, as I told you, whether that immotility is live or dead sperm.
Yeah.
If you have the same finding on a second sample also, which is done about 2 to 3 months later, you could give the patient carnitine in a period of 2 months. And if you still find that the semen sample is immotile but live sperm, you can take the patient for ART. And if the finding has changed to motile sperm, you can always go ahead with IUI.
Yeah.
Ashwini, if the samples for IUI more than 2, how will you follow the labeling of samples? What is your method of labeling samples?
The labeling should start with the collection itself. Whenever you give the container to the patient, always label it, and then only keep it on the laminar, or then only accept it inside the lab. And the name should be written as a complete name. It should never be written as just the first name or the surname. It should be a complete name. I follow writing the middle name also, because many a times the surnames are repeated or the names are repeated.
So complete full name is there.
Yes.
And patient identification is important.
Yes.
Container name is very important.
Yes.
And one more question from Dr. Jitendra. what are recent lower normal limits of normal semen parameters according to recent WHO criteria? You already said about this.
I already explained.
This is 2010 50 days
WHO 2010 manual, yeah.
Okay. And what is important, either motility or vitality?
Motility is important, sir, in IUI, and if you have to go in for ART procedures, even an immotile live sperm is fair enough to do an ART procedure.
And if liquefaction doesn't happen with the pipette up and down movement, then what will you do?
If the patient has persistent liquefaction problems, you could put in some media inside and then give the patient for collection and ask him to just shake it after he gives the sample. That solves the problem for liquefaction. Or you mix equal amount of media once it is in the lab and do up and down movement of pipetting. 100% times the problem of liquefaction is solved.
Is there any chemical solution or any material that will
You can
liquefy?
use bromelain, but it's generally not used by anybody nowadays. Initially, I used to use bromelain, but now this solves the purpose.
Actually,
So
there is
almost all questions are finished. Ashwini, very thank you much. Thank you. One more question.
Yes, because there is one more question. What should be done in cases where the husband is HbSAg positive?
You would treat the patient in the same way as you would do in a discordant couple. You have to tell them clearly that no matter how you prepare the sample, HbSAg is going to be transmitted. It is not 100% foolproof. And if the patient is still ready with that, you could go ahead and do the IUI in the same way as you would treat a seropositive patient. All universal precautions have to be taken.
There's one more question coming up, the success rate of IUI, but I think let Chaitanya.
Chaitanya will cover in his talk.
Yeah. Wonderful talk, Ashwini. Very, very nice.
Thank you so much, sir.
Great one. Great one.
Thank you very much, Ashwini. Very nicely talked.
Thank you, Prakash, sir.
Thank you, Ashwini. Very nice.